From our old history classes to the blockbuster hits featuring Marvel's mighty Thor, we've grown accustomed to seeing gods as grand, majestic figures, imposing, sitting on gleaming golden thrones, and always holding the fate of humanity in the palm of their hands. After all, commanding profound respect is the golden rule of any mythology. But what would happen if, in your darkest hour of despair, you prayed to the heavens for help, and instead of a supreme immortal warrior, you got a slacker in a tracksuit charging 5 yen to scrub your bathroom floor? That's exactly the brilliant hook at the heart of Noragami, but dismissing a deadbeat deity doing daily odd jobs as just absurd comedy would be a huge mistake. The anime delivers heavy-hitting action, a dark, murderous past, and a ton of heart, throwing the protagonist together with an angsty teenager and a high school girl who literally keeps leaving her soul on the pavement. At its core, the narrative delivers a gut punch, proving that the worst fate isn't death, it's being completely forgotten. So buckle up, because today is all about Noragami, a completely broke protagonist, but an absolute must-watch. A useless student gets bullied in class and stares out the window, only to spot a colossal, jelly-like monster floating outside. She immediately starts praying to any cheap-ass deity, and the answer comes in the form of Yato, a tracksuit-wearing hobo claiming to be a god, balancing on a water tower with his divine weapon, Tomone. Yato flips a 5-yen coin, draws his glowing blade, and dives in to slice the creature, justifying that the freak was born from exam season stress. But the moment the monster turns to dust, Tomone decides she can't stand holding this loser's sweaty hands anymore and quits on the spot. Yato cries exactly like you do when you get ghosted, releases the girl, and she bails, cussing him out without a single drop of respect. Weaponless and dignity-free, Yato vandalizes a wall by spray painting his own phone number. He gets an urgent call to rescue Milord, who turns out to be just a cat with a British lord's name. While the hobo god screams for the animal in the street, he crosses paths with Hiyori, a gossipy high schooler walking with her friends and talking about boys. Yato spots the cat in the middle of the street and runs like a total moron straight into the path of a bus. Hiyori, in a fit of suicidal heroism, shoves the bum out of the way and takes the isekai hit in his place. She wakes up in her family's hospital, only to hear from her friends that there was no boy in the street and she just threw herself into traffic on her own. The schizophrenia hit hard. Later, Hiyori wakes up in the middle of the night to the sound of monster roars and finds Yato hiding under her covers. She jumps out of bed with feline reflexes and tries to call the cops, but he starts spewing his delusions of grandeur about being a supreme god. He asks her name, pretends to care, and jumps out the window, declaring that they're now even. The next day, Hiyori goes to school but starts passing out randomly all over the place. Her soul is literally slipping out of her body. She sees a missing cat poster, remembers the divine hobo, and decides to hunt the guy down. Yato is completely high on catnip hunting for this milord, but ends up attracting a giant monster. He winds up to draw his weapon and remembers that his weapon broke up with him. Hiyori appears out of nowhere, saves the useless guy again, kicks the demon in the face, and the two make a run for it. Yato points behind her and points out that Hiyori has a pink tail swinging from her, revealing that her soul jumped out of her physical body, which is currently slumped over a nearby fence. Hiyori gets sucked back into her flesh, wakes up in Yato's lap, and immediately slaps him in the face, calling him a pervert. He explains that she is now trapped between the world of the living and the dead. She begs the god to plug the hole in her soul, and the cheapskate agrees to do the job for the absolute fortune of exactly 5 yen. Hiyori's soul keeps slipping out of her body faster than your dignity on a weekend, whether she's completely naked in the shower or changing for PE. Leaving her empty meat sack for her friends to drag to the nurse's office, she takes advantage of her phantom form to sprint through the city at top speed. She calls Yato, who is currently vandalizing a train, to call him a fraud for not fixing her problem yet. The bum teleports right next to her to prove his godhood, but says it's impossible to fix her soul's leak without a divine weapon. Then he vanishes again to go scrub a client's toilet in exchange for a coin and a can of warm beer. Hiyori decides to do the lazy god's job and hunts for a weapon on her own, heading straight toward a massive tornado of demonic spirits. She calls Yato, bragging about finding a new tool, but when he teleports to the scene, he finds out the idiot tried to adopt a colossal, razor-toothed monster. The duo makes a desperate run for it. Hiyori tries to solve things with her fists and kick the freak, but Yato blocks her and gets his arm brutally chewed up by the beast, forcing the monster to temporarily retreat. Yato forbids Hiyori from touching the wound, explaining that he caught a disgusting infection called blight, which will corrode his flesh down to the bone if it isn't purified. He also warns her that her pink tail is the only thing keeping her alive, and if it gets cut, she's dead meat for good. The monster comes back bloodthirsty, but Yato focuses on a small ball of white light floating in the distance. It's the uncorrupted soul of a depressed teenager, and Yato wastes no time forcing the kid to become his new blade, naming him Yukine.
My servant. With these names I use my life to make thee a regalia fit. Thou art Yuki, as regalia Seki!
The moment the sword takes shape, Yato absorbs all of the kid's traumas and tragic memories, goes into absolute shock, and falls, getting swallowed whole by the monster. Hiyori screams in panic, but Yato's eye glows from inside and he slices the creature, exploding the beast in a shower of goo from the inside out. He hits the ground bawling, crying over his own sword's drama, and sits down to cleanse the blight from his arm. Yukine returns to his blonde boy form and starts shivering from the cold. Yato offers his sweat-stained jacket, but the kid would rather die of hypothermia than touch the hobo god's trash. Hiyori wraps her scarf around the kid's neck, leaving Yato staring into the void as he processes the humiliation of being rejected by his own tool. Yato starts the day digging through a charity donation bin to fish out old clothes for his new regalia, while Yukine has an existential crisis about feeling cold even though he's dead. To top off their misery, a stray cat simply steals their pathetic lunch, forcing the deadbeat god to call Hiyori and exploit her wallet to get a real meal. Inside the restaurant, the waiters completely ignore the undead duo. Outside, Yukine admits he has no memory of when he was alive, and decides to let his teenage hormones run wild, having completely dirty and obscene thoughts while staring at the high schooler. The problem is that gods and regalias share the same mind and body, and Yato walks out of the restaurant taking a sharp sting to the chest, feeling all of the boy's pent-up lust pulsing through him. Yato crushes the kid's excitement, telling him he knows exactly what he was imagining. A client calls for an extermination service, and Yato tries to teleport with his blade, but accidentally drags Hiyori's soul along. They land at the luxurious shrine of Tenjin, the filthy rich god of academics, and to make the mood perfectly awkward, Tenjin's new magical servant is Mayu, none other than Yato's ex-regalia, who makes a point of judging the absolute loser. Mayu guides the losers to the city's train tracks, revealing that phantoms are possessing depressed workers and forcing everyone to jump onto the tracks. Hiyori tries to play the hero, but Yato turns his back, spitting that if people want to throw themselves in front of a train, they should be left to die, since souls tainted by suicide aren't even fit to become regalias. Boiling with rage, Hiyori goes alone to try and kick the demons in the face. The result is obvious. The useless girl is instantly crushed, captured, and tied to the tracks right in the path of a speeding train. Mayu points out that Yato has already pocketed the payment, and Yukine pressures his master, forcing the bum to actually work. They arrive at the very last millisecond, slicing up the creatures and stopping a suited student from turning into track pate. At sunset, Hiyori tries to butter Yato up by praising him for saving the day, but he cuts the chatter and throws the truth in her face. He refuses to let people throw their lives away right in front of the regalias, because regalias know the true value of life. Hiyori finally puts 2 and 2 together. 2 plus 2 equals 4, realizing that all the spirits there wanted to keep living, but were given no choice. Later at the shrine, Yukine wakes up freezing, and Yato throws a ridiculous, gross jacket he found in the trash in his face, praising the boy for his first job. While the two sleep in the cold, a mysterious little girl watches them from the entrance, probably assessing their extreme level of poverty. Our favorite deadbeat god is having delusions of grandeur about being rich and famous, but the rebellious teenage spirit decides the best alarm clock is kicking the protagonist down the stairs in the middle of the night. The next morning, the girl whose body doesn't know how to behave brings bento boxes to try and make the useless guy listen to her requests, but instead, he decides to show off a collection of counterfeit items and pyramid schemes that will supposedly turn him into a top-tier deity. Frustrated with the guy's chronic stupidity, the girl demands he get his act together for the sake of his own regalia. In response, he drags them both to meet Kofuku, introducing the pink-haired girl as his girlfriend. But when the vagrant god tries to scam her, her overprotective personal bodyguard, Daikoku, launches the protagonist into the wall with a World Cup-worthy kick. They are still invited in, but our beggar flies across the room once again after blabbing to everyone that Daikoku likes to stare at little children, proving he has absolutely zero survival instincts. While they calmly drink tea, Kofuku gossips that she's heard dark rumors about our tracksuit hero, calling him a terrifying god, but out of nowhere, the protagonist pops up announcing they have a job, dragging everyone to a tall building. It turns out a depressed idiot named Yusuke tried to call his parents before jumping off the roof but dialed the wrong number, and And to make the guy's miserable life even worse, our god falls from the sky directly on top of him, knocking the poor soul off the building.
Yato, at your service!
While the four plummet in a freefall that lasts longer than your last romantic relationship, Yusuke decides to tell his life story, explaining he went bankrupt buying gifts for his soul-sucking girlfriend. When the god asks for a picture of the leech, Yusuke pulls out a photo of Kofuku, shocking the group. The protagonist reveals that she is the god of poverty, bringing misfortune to anyone unlucky enough to get close to her. The god offers to sever Yusuke's ties to her, but the ultimate simp refuses, saying he'd rather die than forget the girl. With zero patience for cheap romance, the god punches the debtor in the face, states that suicidal people aren't fit for love, and uses his blonde blade to sever the tie by force. Yusuke lands on the ground intact and without the goddess's contact in his phone. Back at the shrine, Daikoku scolds the goddess for sneaking out, before praising the rookie spirit's perfect cut and tossing a payment to the vagrant. As the two leave, the half-phantom girl stays behind, wanting to know the reason for the gossip from earlier. Kofuku makes a psychotic face and reveals that the tracksuit hero has slaughtered Regalius and humans in the past, and Daikoku adds that minor gods had to fulfill any disgusting wish so they wouldn't fade from existence. Shaken, she catches up to the god and asks the true reason for his visit. He gives it to her straight, saying that if he kicks the bucket, she should run straight to Kofuku. Meanwhile, the blonde spirit is reflecting by the lake, but is interrupted by the appearance of a bizarre phantom girl covered in markings, who reveals herself as the protagonist's stray Regalia, Nora, saying she'll just be waiting on the bench until the master calls her name to play again. Our deadbeat god decides to play teacher and shows his rookie spirit how to draw a borderline, an anti-phantom magical barrier that only Regalius can use. The brat creates an absurdly strong shield on his first try, proving he's better at this than any other weapon the protagonist has ever touched. Thinking the god is a completely useless guardian, the schoolgirl decides to kidnap the blonde kid and take him to her house, shoving him into her older brother's room. The infiltration plan seemed like a success until her parents got home, followed by the hoodie-wearing stray god, who casually breaks into the house, steals food from the fridge, and dips without looking back. Outside, the girl confronts the intruder, and when he asks if the kid is enjoying his new home, she throws in his face that he's just happy not to be sleeping in a crumbling shrine. That's when the god gives a survival lesson, explaining that sleeping in shrines is the only thing keeping phantoms from devouring them at night, while casually dropping that the tough guy spirit is dead scared of the dark. And he was absolutely right, because as soon as her dad turns off the lights, the kid dives under the girl's covers. He tries to use the situation to cop a feel, but the god spawns out of nowhere to kill the mood. Frustrated at having his fun ruined, the kid snaps and yells that the god doesn't need him anyway, since he has his creepy ex on standby. Across town, a blonde goddess named Bishamon shows off her personal army of Regalius, using an earring as a GPS to annihilate 3 giant phantoms before vanishing into the darkness. The next morning, the schoolgirl takes the rebellious kid to the mall to buy him some gloves, but the brat decides pain is for suckers, grabs a skateboard off the rack, and skates out of the store. She scolds him for stealing, but he runs off like a spoiled teenager. The stray god shows up at the store complaining of pain, explaining once again that gods and their regalias share a mind and body, so every time the kid screws up, the god's body is pierced with pain. He makes it clear that the pain is one-sided, and that one day the boy will face divine punishment. This reminds the girl of the rumor that the protagonist is a regalia killer, prompting her to drop her physical body on the floor and sprint after the teenager. Meanwhile, the sun starts to set, and the kid runs frantically looking for shelter from the dark, only to bump into the spirit of a little girl. She begs him to keep her company until her mom arrives, and he agrees. But when night falls and he tells her the mom isn't coming, the little kid cries, attracting shadowy phantom tentacles that promise to take her to her family. The blonde kid creates his epic barrier to save the girl, but discovers she's already completely infected.
Border!
I just noticed. You actually smell really nice.
The darkness swallows the boy and the schoolgirl who tried to help, until the stray god slices through everything to save them both. The kid begs his master to save the little girl, but our hero simply amputates the phantom's leg and drops the harsh truth. She's been fully consumed, and the only way to save her is by slicing her in half. The boy sheds tears as the god swings his sword, killing the creature and freeing the child's soul in the blink of an eye. The blonde kid spends the day lying in bed, radiating depressed teenager energy after being used to slice chase up a little girl. The schoolgirl tries to cheer the ghost up by leaving cookies and hot cocoa at his door, but the kid's traumatized brain imagines a phantom crawling in the food, making him run frantically to the mall. In a fit of teenage rebellion, he decides the best coping mechanism is committing crimes and steals the damn skateboard, sending a magical stab of pure agony straight into the deadbeat god's body. While the girl tries to find the delinquent, she bumps into her normal friends, who make fun of the fact that she keeps passing out in the middle of class. While the kid tries to do tricks on the stolen skateboard, the protagonist blocks his path and demands to know where he got it. The compulsive liar claims the girl bought it for him, and when she shows up, she decides to cover for the criminal and confirms the lie. But before the moral lesson can begin, the deadliest woman in the universe decides to show up. The blonde goddess, Bishamon, spawns out of nowhere riding her giant lion and starts beating the crap out of the stray god and the blonde spirit with a deadly whip. The two run for their lives while the goddess chases them using an advanced tracking earring named Kazuma. During the sprint, the protagonist explains that absolutely everything that woman is wearing, from her weapons and clothes to her mount, are regalias. Worried about the imminent beatdown her friends are about to get, the girl runs to the goddess of poverty and her bodyguard, warning them about the massacre, and the trio decides to track down the mess using the schoolgirl's phantom body's bloodhound skills. Hiding in an alley and practically on life support, the kid asks if the stray god really did wipe out the angry blonde's regalias, and he confirms it without a shred of remorse. Before group therapy can continue, the goddess finds their hiding spot and attacks again. However, the goddess of poverty kicks the door down, summoning her own power to tear open a vent in the sky that starts vomiting endless phantoms, creating the perfect distraction. The blonde orders her giant lion to devour the stray god, but the protagonist's creepy ex, Nora, steps out of the shadows, paralyzing the beast and giving our hero the perfect opening to slice the lion's eye. Seeing her kitty bleeding, the goddess snaps and summons her tracker, Regalia, Kazuma, to heal the wound. The tracker takes his human form and gives his boss a reality check, telling her that if she keeps fighting here, the phantoms are going to feast on her face. She swallows her pride and falls back, warning the protagonist to stop accumulating blight from his regalia, while Kazuma gives our hero a sinister glare and bows in respect before leaving, confusing the hell out of everyone. Later, the god tries to purify himself of the purple patches of blight rotting his body, but the holy water bath doesn't work. It's in this moment of weakness that the bizarre, mark-covered girl spawns out of nowhere once again, whispering in her psycho voice that her body is always available for him to use. The angry blonde, Bishamon, is taking a hot spring bath while interrogating Kazuma about our deadbeat protagonist's whereabouts. Kazuma dodges the topic with the skill of a politician escaping prison, and even lectures the goddess for using her regalias like disposable paper towels in battle. They head out to hunt phantoms, and Hiyori decides to play delivery girl, bringing food to Yukine's room. However, the one she finds lying in bed stuffing his face isn't the kid, but Yato himself, who reveals the brat tried to switch masters and begged the god Tenjin to take him in. Obviously, he got gloriously rejected because Yato already had the creepy girl named Nora in his inventory. Meanwhile, Yato is out in the middle of nowhere washing his rotting neck with pure spring water, recalling Nora's temptations to just throw the teenager in the trash and use her instead.
It's not like you don't have options. I can be useful, much more useful than he can.
Across town, Hiyori is on a roof contemplating life when she spots Bishamon. She tries to sneak away but runs right into Kazuma, who mysteriously hides her from his own master. He reveals that even though Bishamon wants Yato's head on a pike, the deadbeat god is actually his secret benefactor. Kazuma gives a grim warning that the rebellious brat needs to be sacrificed before he completely rots Yato away. Hiyori freaks out, remembering that Yato used to be a god of calamity who would slaughter anyone, including humans and his own regalias. Back to the daily chaos, Yato catches Yukine cursing Tenjin out, laughs, and drags the kid to a humiliating part-time job at a convenience store. When Daikoku and Kofuku bring Hiyori to force Yato to hunt a phantom, Yukine has a jealous meltdown involving Nora, tries to steal the charity money like a useless petty thief, and runs off. Hiyori chases after Yato and rips him a new one for not treating the kid like a human being. Mid-escape, Nora creeps on Yukine in an alley, whispering that his eyes are dull and lifeless. When Yato and Hiyori catch up to the runaway, a phantom spawns out of thin air. Yukine's mental trauma makes the blade so dull that Yato can't deal any damage. Needing to solve the problem fast, the god lubricates Yukine's blade with his spring water, gaining enough penetration to slice the creature down once and for all. Far away, Nora meets up with a bizarre red-eyed guy named Rabo, complaining that Yato rejected her and isn't the great killer he used to be. Hiyori is peacefully minding her own business in the school's girls' bathroom when the deadbeat god and his teenage regalia teleport right into her stall. Like any sane person would, she starts beating the two intruders with toilet paper rolls until Yato reveals they were summoned by a client suffering in the next stall. The client is Manabu, the school's official punching bag. Yukine listens to his bullying stories and is immediately triggered by his own trauma. To fix the situation, Yato reaches into his pocket and hands a mysterious item to the defeated kid, promising help. Meanwhile, Yukine takes a depressing tour of the hallways, spying on happy teenagers in a classroom and realizing he's just a needy, invisible ghost to society. Just like you at family parties. Far from the school, at the Goddess of Poverty's house, Bishamon and her gang invade the backyard demanding predictions on where the phantom vents will open. Kolf-ku smiles sweetly while doing her job, but warns that if Bishamon lays a single finger on Yato, she'll summon a storm of disasters no one will ever forget. Not brave enough to call her bluff, the fierce warrior packs it up and leaves. Back to the high school drama, Manabu corners his bully holding Yato's gift, a trusty box cutter. An invisible phantom tries to whisper in his ear to stab the bully and end his suffering, but the kid remembers Yato's warning about only using the blade if he wants to lose his humanity. He decides to spare the coward, who runs away pissing his pants. Yato shows up, impressed by the boy's self-control, and drops a catchphrase saying he just needs one true friend, so he won't be a complete failure, leaving Manabu feeling motivated. But the sanity quota for today has run out. Yukine keeps spying on people, having a total meltdown out of jealousy for the life he can't have. Completely consumed by teenage angst, the boy picks up a metal bat off the ground and starts smashing all the school windows with a vengeance. Every shattered glass reflects a stab of blight straight into Yato's body, who collapses on the floor writhing in excruciating pain. Hiyori carries the half-dead god on her back like a pack mule, captures the delinquent, and runs for help. But when they arrive at Kofku's house, Daikoku takes one look at Yato's radioactive state, throws up a magical borderline at the door, and refuses to let the disaster trio inside. Hiyori begs desperately, so the big guy only allows the girl to come in. Kofku drops her smile and gets real, stating that the rebellious brat needs to undergo a torturous purification ritual called ablution, the only thing that can save Yato. The problem is, the ritual requires 3 regalias willing to risk their own existence, so Daikoku runs to Tenjin's shrine like a beggar. Only Mayu is crazy enough to accept the suicide mission, meaning they're still short one volunteer. Knowing the urgency, Hiyori decides to handle the problem herself. She even considers calling Psycho Nora, but realizes the girl would use the chance to gladly kill Yukine. Out of options, our schoolgirl runs to Bishamon's own shrine, flirting with instant death by screaming for Kazuma at the top of her lungs. The massive scene she causes actually works, and Kazuma drags the girl away before she turns to dust. Back at Kofku's place, Yukine tries to run from the consequences of his actions, but bumps right into Kazuma, who shocks everyone by showing up to help his master's greatest enemy, claiming he owed Yato a favor. With no time to lose, Kazuma still tries to convince Yato to banish and destroy Yukine, but the deadbeat god refuses. Daikoku rips the teenager's shirt off, revealing the boy's back is infested with disgusting tentacles of blight. The three form a magical triangle and the ablution begins, swallowing Yukine and Yato in light and absolute agony. The brat is ordered to confess his crimes, but instead of apologizing, he goes full rebellious teen mode, sprouting grotesque wings from his back and threatening to slice everyone in the room because he feels alone and rejected. The situation spirals so out of control that Kazuma and Mayu lose hope and order Daikoku to execute the boy before they all die together. But right before the fatal blow, Hiyori throws herself at the barrier, mother, gives the kid a monumental lecture, and reminds him that Yato is enduring this torture like a devoted father who never gave up on him. She plays her final card, saying that if he keeps throwing his tantrum, their friendship is officially cancelled. Yato coughs up blood and uses his last ounce of voice to order Yukine to keep living with the name he was given. The miracle of teenage crying happens, the gross slime evaporates, and the boy collapses in tears, admitting he's a needy punk and regretting everything. The next morning, everyone looks like they just survived a nuclear war. Yato and Yukine apologize for almost destroying the entire cast, and Hiyori crushes them both in a dramatic hug, crying tears of relief that she doesn't have to bury her only weird friends. Our reformed little delinquent Yukine gets a part-time job with Daikoku to pay off his mounting debts and support the chronically unemployed Yato, who dodges a 9-to-5 like a vampire dodges garlic. When the kid asks to borrow Hiyori's old textbooks to try and learn what normal kids study, Yato and Hiyori start crying tears of joy, looking like two proud dog parents watching their puppy use a pee pad for the very first time. The sentimental party abruptly ends when Kolfku pops out of nowhere and bills Yato 10 million yen for helping him out twice, acting like the neighborhood's worst loan shark. Yato miraculously cries his way into a 90% discount, dropping a smooth 1 million yen debt entirely onto Hiyori's shoulders. She immediately starts beating the crap out of the hobo god, demanding he pay her bill, trying to run away from his financial responsibilities. Yato visits Tenjin to thank him for his previous help, but the two immediately get into a 5th grade shouting match. Meanwhile, Mayu, Hiyori, and Yukine step aside to gossip about how one of Tenjin's regalias has gone missing. Mayu then opens her heart and confesses that she was banished for stinging Tenjin after self-harming, warning Yukine that this spiritual depression is highly contagious. Yato finally grows a spine and tells the old god that he is determined to fix Hiyori's chronic soul-slipping problem, since she saved their lives. Tenjin, hitting him with that mystical boomer wisdom, suggests Yato simply cut ties with the girl, claiming that blocking her from his life is the only actual cure to keep her anchored in the real world.
Try cutting that connection as a test. Shouldn't be hard for you.
Later, Hiyori makes plans to visit a shrine with her friends for New Year's and invites Yato and Yukine, who are busy scrubbing toilets. On the way to the meeting spot, professional stalkers Rabo and the stray Nora watch Hiyori from a rooftop, while Rabo is already weighing the pros and cons of assassinating Hiyori. When Hiyori arrives at the festival, her soul slips out of her body, and she chases after a guy she swears is Yato. At the same time, Yato and Yukine take on an extermination job that quickly turns into a monster pandemonium, while Nora intercepts Hiyori and unleashes some bizarre wolves on her. After Hiyori survives by running like a marathoner until dawn, the monsters vanish, leaving only a creepy conversation between the two girls. Yato and Yukine finish off a giant scorpion and rush to the shrine, leaving Rabo smiling on a roof for having successfully tested the tracksuit god's skills. But when the trio finally reunites, Yato and Yukine get a massive reality check when they realize Hiyori's brain has been completely wiped and she has absolutely no idea who they are. Yato and Yukine go into a full-blown panic trying to reboot Hiyori's wiped hard drive, but they are interrupted by the divine gun for hire, Nora, who proudly confesses to stealing her memories. She reveals she's back to using the name Furuhime as Rabo's personal weapon. Rabo immediately lunges at Yato, hoping to force a violent awakening. Since our protagonist is currently weaker than public Wi-Fi, he takes a humiliating beating and can't even land a scratch on the villain. Seeing her ex's utter incompetence, Furuhime recalls her boss and dangles the bait. She'll only return Hiyori's mental hard drive if Yato manages to defeat Rabo. We then find out that Rabo is a god of calamity who specializes in taking malicious requests to wipe out people, phantoms, and other gods. He also used to spread chaos hand in hand with Yato back in the day when our hero was still a dark edgelord. While Yato spirals into a deep existential crisis, debating whether Hiyori would be better off forgetting him for good, Yukine acts like a desperate ex-boyfriend, showing the girl a photo album full of all the ridiculous moments they spent together. But Furuhime refuses to let anyone be happy and reappears to worsen the diagnosis. She reveals that the memory hole in Hiyori's mind is expanding at an absurd rate, proving her point when the girl completely forgets who Yukine is. If nothing is done, she'll turn into an empty, drooling husk on the floor. Ignoring all the risks of imminent death, Yato and Yukine decide to storm the enemy base to take back what was stolen. They make a quick pit stop to warn the girl, but the moment Yato uses his teleportation to escape with Yukine, Hiyori grabs onto him so hard that all three of them vanish, diving headfirst into the worst hangout of the year. Rabo is chilling in his dilapidated shrine, delivering a lonely monologue about how amazing gods of calamity are, when Yato, Yukine, and the incredibly nosy Hiyori drop in from the ceiling. Yato tells the girl to get lost so she doesn't get in the way of the beatdown, before summoning his blade and rushing in like a maniac. The two trade aggressive blows until Rabo traps the protagonist in a giant water bubble, proving the god can't hold his breath for 10 seconds. Fortunately, Hiyori drags the wet idiot out of the fish tank, and Yato yells at her for not running away before humbly thanking her for saving his life yet again. Realizing Yato has gone completely soft, Rabo redirects his attacks at Hiyori to try and drag out his rival's killer instincts, forcing the boys to block the strike and scramble to save her skin. Yato begs Yukine to grab the girl and get the hell out of there, but the regalia refuses to leave his master fighting barehanded. Taking advantage of the drama, Rabo lifts the glowing sphere holding Hiyori's memories and tosses it into the air. Yato makes a desperate dash to catch the marble, but Rabo slices the object in half, causing Hiyori to collapse on the ground.
Hiyori! Please, wake up!
Seeing the girl power down flips Yato's psychopath switch. He summons his sword, slashes the villain, and kicks him around the lake like a rag doll. The beating is so severe that Rabo decides to cheat, absorbing an entire storm and fusing with phantoms to try and even the playing field. During the chaos, Rabo triggers a landslide to crush the unconscious girl, but Yukine gives a heads up just in time for Yato to pull her out of the impact zone. Surprisingly, the smell of Yato's divine BO penetrates Hiyori's nostrils, causing her brain to reboot and restore all her memories out of sheer spite. She wakes up and immediately kicks Yato out of pure embarrassment before getting dragged away again by the villain who insists on trying to kill her. Yato orders Yukine to slice the bastard, and when the weapon hesitates, afraid of hitting Hiyori too, Yato promises he has absolute control over the cut. They obliterate Rabo's monster armor, freeing the girl. When Rabo raises his sword for one last pathetic strike, Yato attacks first and buries the guy into the ground. Yato looks at his destroyed face and realizes Rabo was using a heavy curse just to keep himself alive. The villain delivers a sad speech about how evil gods are forgotten like yesterday's leftovers, admitting he just wanted to be killed by someone who actually remembered him. He turns to dust right in front of them, while Bishamon and Tenjin sense his death from afar. Nora cries over the failed mission and goes to complain in the lap of her mysterious daddy. When Yukine asks how the hell Hiyori got her memory back, she hides the fact that it was triggered by Yato's scent. The tracksuit god suggests one last time that she cut ties so she can live a normal life, but Hiyori puts her foot down and says she wants to stay with them forever. Celebrating the fact that they've scored an eternal sugar mama, Yato agrees to make her wish come true for the absurd fortune of 5 yen. The warrior goddess Bishamon wakes up in a cold sweat after dreaming about the day Yato butchered all her subordinates, leaving only Kazuma alive to tell the tale. With renewed hatred and her thirst for revenge hitting the ceiling, she gets up ready to commit some crimes. Meanwhile, our trio of slackers, Yato, Yukine, and Hiyori, takes on a babysitting gig to look after a newborn. Naturally, the depressed baby materializes a bizarre phantom made out of its own loneliness just by trying to play with its reflection in the mirror. Yato has Yukine slice the kid's shadow in half, solving the problem with good old-fashioned spiritual violence. Back at the goddess of poverty's house, Hiyori decides to play tutor and tries to cram some knowledge into Yukine's hollow skull, deducing that the kid kicked the bucket in the second year of middle school. Yato tries to reassure his dysfunctional family by showing off his newest lucky charm, promising that wealth will finally smile upon them. The only problem is that Hiyori points out the piece of junk is made of cheap plastic. When the hobo god confesses he blew 200 grand on this scam, the two beat the living daylights out of him without an ounce of pity, with Yukine whining that they wouldn't have to lick crumbs off the floor if their boss wasn't so financially illiterate. Later, the two celestial beggars are strolling through the city and have to dive into the first hiding spot they find to avoid Bishamon. The blonde goddess doesn't even notice the losers because she's too busy watching a soul being chewed on by phantoms. Kazuma begs her not to adopt anyone else since her divine Wi-Fi is already overloaded, but she ignores him, purifies the newbie with what looks like a a nail file and names her Mineha. Far away, Yukine walks with his head down because he's invisible to the entire world, just like you at a club. A kid named Suzuha pops out of nowhere and introduces himself as another spirit, making the little blonde kid wag his tail in happiness for finally making a friend. The joy lasts exactly 2 seconds before he finds out the kid works for the exact same goddess who wants his boss's head on a pike. Bishamon starts coughing up a lung from adopting too many people, but her doctor, Kugaha, shows up just to snitch that Kazuma helped with Yato's purification ritual. She laughs in his face, assuming it's fake news. Hiyori says goodbye to the tracksuit god, threatening to stick to him like glue until he finally fixes her body for good.
I'm sticking with you till you do. Well, see you tomorrow.
The quack Dr. Kugaha decides to take a stroll to pick some weeds and bumps into Nora. They gossip about how Yato would be the perfect puppet for their plans. While the villains scheme, Yukine runs to tell his master that he finally made a friend, shocking absolutely no one with his blatant neediness. Yato goes begging for a job from the filthy rich Tenjin, who praises the blonde kid for turning into a decent guy despite having absolute trash for a father figure. After slicing up some generic monsters on the god of knowledge's orders, Yukine flies off to meet Suzuha. The innocent newbie helps his new best friend plant flowers and take care of an old cherry tree, complaining the whole time about how his cheapskate boss steals his money. Suzuha thinks their dynamic is adorable, proving he's not quite right in the head. Our tragic new buddy tells the depressing story of how he spent decades without speaking to his own goddess and cultivated a friendship with a human girl named Tomoko. Every summer the girl would show up, and every summer she would forget he existed. He kept taking care of the tree in the pathetic hope that her botanical memory was better than her mental one. Hearing this makes Yukine spiral into despair, thinking Hiyori is going to delete them from her memory too. Taking advantage of Suzuha being alone and vulnerable, Kugaha pops out of the shadows, shifts the blame for the abandonment onto Bishamon, and sicks a pack of phantoms on the kid, sending him straight to the afterlife's afterlife. The next day, Yukine drags Hiyori to a picnic to introduce her to his now dead friend, but the guy obviously stands them up. They catch Yato spying on them from the bushes, and Hiyori thanks him for his concern by yeeting the tracksuit god straight into the bottom of the river. Bishamon finally realizes she's missing a lackey and questions the troops. The entire squad flashes fake smiles and lies straight to her face to avoid infecting their boss, even though they're internally panicking. The goddess notices Tsuguha's hair has been chopped up, the work of the jealous Aiha, who lost her mind over losing the spot as the primary combat outfit. Kazuma, the bespectacled strategist, calls a secret HOA meeting to figure out who is rotting their boss's health. Everyone confesses their sins, clearing the blonde goddess's system. In the dead of night, Kugaha pushes his luck by throwing monsters at Yato. The hobo god mops the floor with the doctor's face using his bare hands. Getting beaten like an old rug, Kugaha tells him not to die before their next encounter. This prompts Yato to scream at the top of his lungs that he will never be forgotten as long as someone remembers him, with the image of the high school girl flashing in his mind. The truth comes out, and we discover that the one causing the blonde goddess's infection was the jealous Aiha, who got black market meds from Kugaha to sweep the dirt under the rug. The girl cries her eyes out, claiming she just wanted the boss's attention and hated seeing Tsuguha paraded around as Bishamon's main loadout. Kugaha offers her a VIP treatment to hide the problem entirely. Far away, Yato continues his stalker hobby by watching Hiyori, who tells him to stop creeping in the bushes and swears up and down she'll never forget him, leaving the god highly suspicious of the girl's level of stupidity. Meanwhile, Kazuma presses the bearded doctor and finds out Suzuha has been turned into phantom dust, making the nerd with glasses question his own competence for missing the death altogether. The gossip spreads when Suzuha tells the boss she saw Yukine walking around with the deceased. Yato orders his blonde kid to cut ties with the cherry tree boy, but Yukine bribes his boss with a cheap bag of chips and runs off to meet his friend. When he gets there, he bumps into Kazuma crying over some flowers and clings to his leg, hitching an accidental ride straight to Yato's public enemy #1's palace. Bishamon comes face to face with the brat in her own backyard. Yukine demands to know about his friend, and Kazuma drops the bomb that Suzuha became monster food. Boiling with rage, the blonde kid points a finger straight in the warrior goddess's face, calls her useless, and states that living under her roof must be pure, unfiltered hell. This causes the goddess's army of children to burst into tears, infecting the blonde's body on the spot. Bishamon finally confronts Kazuma about his betrayal with Yato. She pulls her gun to light Yukine up, but Kazuma throws up a magic barrier to protect the enemy.
Traitor!
Possessed by the fury of someone who just suffered a cosmic betrayal, she kicks her own right-hand man out of the house. Kugaha watches the drama unfold from the front row, salivating with joy that his Machiavellian plan is working. Without the computer nerd to control their powers and prevent friendly fire, the rest of the goddesses Regilius have a collective depressive breakdown. Kazuma seeks asylum at the goddess of poverty's house, where Yato plants the seed of discord by saying Suzuha's murder was an inside job. Later, the tracksuit god walks Hiyori home, but the jealous Aiha jumps out of the shadows swinging a stick coated in dark magic. Yato crushes the poor girl without breaking a sweat, but takes his eyes off the high schooler for a millisecond. It's just long enough for Kugaha to show up and kidnap Hiyori. Kazuma tries to play the hero, but finds out the hard way that the bearded doctor is a stray with multiple masters, easily knocking the nerd out like swatting a mosquito. Yato turns around to find only the empty shell of his one and only human ATM lying on the ground, proving that he truly cannot have a single day of peace. Our favorite hobo god realizes things have gone completely south when he discovers he's lost his primary source of teenage income. The traitorous Dr. Kugaha locks Hiyori and the strategist Kazuma in a VIP spiritual prison, setting up an absurd divine cage where absolutely no one gets in and no one gets out. Having pretty much nothing to do with a girl in a deep coma, Yato puts in the bare minimum effort and dumps Hiyori's empty physical shell at her family's hospital, half-heartedly praying to some higher entity that the kid doesn't turn into a vegetable. With his blood boiling and his hatred hitting the roof, the tracksuit god marches straight to Kofuku's house and drops the bomb on Yukine, giving him a detailed play-by-play of the kidnapping. The useless teenager goes into an instant depressive spiral, whining and heavily blaming himself for not being glued to his master at the time of the crime. But the morning and therapy session lasts exactly 5 seconds, because Yato decides the only logical solution to this tiny hiccup is to storm Bishamon's house with brute force. He is absolutely certain the muscular blonde ordered the quack doctor to snatch the girl, meaning all common sense gets tossed straight into the garbage. Daikoku spirals into deep despair and tries to stop the two suicidal idiots, failing miserably to halt the blind fury of the god of calamity. Meanwhile, Kofuku, the goddess of poverty with the biggest and most terrifying brain in the room, smiles and announces she's betting all her money on Bishamon's crushing victory. Being a walking plague that literally destroys everything she touches, she knows that rooting for the goddess of war is the ultimate cosmic guarantee that Yato will win at the end of the day. She prefers to sit back and add fuel to the fire rather than intervene physically, because if she lifted a single finger, her streak of bad luck would probably trigger a colossal chain reaction and wipe out thousands of innocent bystanders as a bonus. Across town, Yato and Yukine kick down the majestic gates of the blonde's palace, handing out free beatdowns everywhere they look. While the luxurious arena literally catches fire, Kazuma and Hiyori uselessly punch the thick energy walls of the spiritual cage, managing only to collect bruises on their hands. With no way out and staring imminent doom right in the face, Kazuma decides to drop the biggest, dirtiest lore drop of the entire series right onto the terrified schoolgirl's lap. The bespectacled nerd openly confesses that he was the one who went crawling to Yato's feet in their dark past, begging on his knees for him to slaughter his entire clan without mercy.
The Ma clan, regalia of Bishamon, have become corrupted.
He reveals that the old celestial family was completely rotten with hidden corruption, and since none of the jealous subordinates would take responsibility for the garbage they caused, the goddess Bishamon began rotting to death from the inside. The entire clan lost their minds and started slaughtering each other in a bizarre battle royale for the monopoly of virtue. To save his boss from a definitive divine fatality, Kazuma hired Yato's dirty services, and Yato brought the pint-sized psychopath Nora to slice up absolutely every living colleague in the room. Cutting aggressively back to the chaotic present-day shootout, Yato's frontal assault plan goes horribly wrong when 3 of the blonde's subordinates trap the god inside an absurd tactical energy dome. This violently separates him from Yukine, leaving the immortal hobo completely defenseless against their lethal attacks. The goddess of war, blinded by all the pent-up hatred in her chest, preps a monumental strike designed to turn Yato into cosmic dust without an ounce of pity. However, surprising everyone who always called him annoying defying deadweight, Yukine frantically jumps in front of the brutal attack to protect his broke master. He ends up being sliced perfectly in half by Bishamon's massive blade, dropping to the floor in 2 tragic pieces. With the blonde teenager sliced into 2 perfectly symmetrical halves on the magical asphalt, Yato goes into a blind panic, crying an ocean over the kid's death while Bishamon raises her colossal weapon once more to deliver the final killing blow. The tracksuit god mentally prepares himself to embrace the void, but suddenly notices a bizarre and incredibly convenient detail. The red name tattooed on his hand didn't mysteriously vanish. In a moment of pure, absurd plot armor miracle that defies all previously established divine logic, he screams the kid's name again. The magical dust settles, and Yukine reappears glowing brightly, proving that getting chopped in half like a sausage was the smartest career move of his entire life. He forcibly evolves into a blessed regalia, materializing as 2 perfect, razor-sharp twin blades instead of just 1. Armed and dangerous with his new premium dual swords, Yato finally manages to trade aggressive, equal blows against the homicidal fury of the enraged war goddess. The insane brawl tears through the palace ruins until Bishamon starts heavily choking on her own blood. She is being severely rotted and devoured from the inside out thanks to the filthy, accumulated sins of her jealous servant, Aiha. As the all-powerful boss drops to her knees in the apocalyptic battlefield, the traitorous Dr. Kugaha shows off his most disgusting smiling face. The traitor summons a colossal horde of starving Ayakashis and orders his pet monsters to literally dine on their own defenseless co-workers, torturing the blonde goddess through the excruciating pain of having her weapons chewed alive right in front of her. Laughing in the face of danger and overly confident in his success, Kugaha decides to monologue his entire evil master plan to a horrified and trembling Aiha. He openly and shamelessly confesses that he can no longer stand looking at the goddess's giant, morally hypocritical palace, and that his great Machiavellian masterpiece is to slowly torture her to her inevitable death. The quack doctor's megalomaniacal scheme is to force Bishamon's mandatory reincarnation, so that she is reborn in a highly vulnerable state, making her easy to manipulate, and allowing him to seize the hidden throne as the little girl's new, irreplaceable right-hand man. Aiha finally feels the dense guilt melt her brain and her inflated ego, desperate and crying as she tries to fix the grotesque monstrosity she helped create behind everyone's back. She hitches an urgent, frantic ride on the old ghost lion Kuraha and sprints at the speed of light to the underground dungeons. She crashes headfirst into Hiyori and Kazuma's invisible hellish barrier, shattering it instantly. Freeing the stressed-out duo, she begs through thick tears for them to run and save the boss from being recycled by her psychotic co-worker's garbage plan. The unlikely rescue trio makes a breakneck sprint right into the middle of the completely destroyed war zone. They scream at the top of their lungs amidst the chaos, trying to hammer the absolute truth into Yato's ears however they can. But Bishamon is so densely consumed by centuries of fermented hatred that she ignores all audio warnings around her and charges suicidally at her rival. Seeing that the blinded goddess is about to obliterate the hobo god out of pure spite, Kazuma makes the worst, most reckless decision of his celestial career and throws his entire body in front of the moving target. He takes the brutal, destructive attack from his own beloved boss straight to his skinny chest, collapsing to the ground and gushing blood dramatically. With the last miserable breath left in his hoarse throat, the bespectacled nerd finally drops the secret nuclear bomb, delivering a massive reality check right to the stunned blonde's face. He openly confesses, screaming it out for all to hear, that he was the exact person who ordered the mass assassination and butchering of the old clan, and that he only used Yato as his disposable, bloody weapon to keep her breathing. The shocking revelation completely shatters Bishamon's armored mind. She breaks down, collapsing into a humiliating sea of tears on the dirty floor, and releases all her readied combat weapons back to the heavens. Weapons that, at this absurd point, were already rotting brutally due to her prolonged, insane stubbornness. As Bishamon continues crying an absolute ocean on her knees upon the shattered ground, choking on the heavy grief for the fresh mountain of her butchered subordinates, Yato decides he's out of free time to put up with this cheap soap opera, and fiercely yells at the disgusting traitor Kugaha to step out of the shadows. The bearded doctor doesn't miss the gold golden opportunity for the spotlight and launches into a massive, ridiculous speech, typical of a third-rate comic book villain. He spits out all his radioactive venom with a smile, claiming that the slender blonde never even came close to being the ruthless, bloodthirsty goddess the world and her resume demanded. He points out she preferred picking up trash weapons, begging on the streets just to pathetically play at having a giant, loving, and blind family in a palace of illusions. Kugaha actively spits in his wounded boss's face, asserting that the absolute carnage of her weapons being chewed alive in the arena was exclusively the fault of her total emotional incompetence. He points a harsh finger, laughing that no sane spirit would ever truly follow her or die for her soiled name. Yato, his patience crossing the absolute zero mark after enduring this spoken freak show, finds the arrogant little lecture so mortally irritating that he simply swings his gleaming new dual blades in the blink of an eye. He slices the doctor's entire right hand off in one clean cut, abruptly ending the haughty monologue through blunt, painful, and traumatic amputation. Mad with foaming rage over the sudden loss of his main limb, Kugaha freaks out on the asphalt and deliberately throws one of his massive, starving Ayakashi monsters straight at the untouchable Yato. He frantically curses the tracksuit-wearing god, calling him a useless piece of stray trash and a moral and financial plague on great heavenly society. But trying to insult and kill Yato at the peak of his adrenaline rush right now is absolutely pointless in the real world. He slices the disgusting monster's face in a perfect millisecond, as if tearing through wet toilet paper in the rain. Right after, he calmly marches straight toward the bleeding, amputated doctor, completely ready to finish off the smiling bastard's neck. However, at the very last dramatic second, Bishamon pushes her exhausted legs up and places her bloody body between the lethal tracksuit assassin and her own corrupted employee who caused this colossal shit show. She stares deep into the dark abyss of the traitor's rotten soul and coldly asks if he genuinely felt anywhere inside that all this disloyal filth was actually the most heroic and correct course of action. Kugaha, severely delusional in his own massive ego, proudly repeats that he did absolutely everything solely and exclusively for her future greatness, guaranteeing he wasn't lying for a single second about what he thought. And the worst part of this bizarre circus is proven when the astonished goddess simply feels no sting of pain or blight coming from his crazy feelings, proving that, in the doctor's sick head, he truly was the great savior of this filthy nation. Bishamon takes a deep breath and accepts the humiliation of violent karma landing right in her lap. She admits that the entire blame for raising such a dangerously blind monster is entirely hers for being a soft leader and a terrible fake mother to her massive troop. In a divine act of dramatic closure, she focuses hard on the old distorted memory of when she adopted that worm. With pure, overwhelming magical force concentrated on her lips, she violently revokes the fake name affectionately tattooed on Kugaha's useless skin.
I will do what must be done. Rocky!
Everything I have done has been for you!
It's over now. Rocky, I release you!
She kicks the now banished ex-employee into absolute and shameful endless exile, abandoning the toxic trash on the cosmic street to rot alone in the eternal gutter he deserved. Their gigantic house still crawling with toxic residue, the goddess focuses her few remaining energies on slicing up all the monsters still dragging themselves alive through the crumbling palace. Yato even pulls out his brand new blades, super excited to aggressively chop up some big demons and show off some free service. But Hiyori, quickly slipping into her stressed babysitter and frustrated soccer mom mode, firmly pulls his ear and categorically orders them to make an urgent strategic retreat. She tells them to go sleep in their own filthy beds and leave the cleaning to the actual residents of that pigsty. Cleaning up the disgusting leftovers of the disaster she caused in her own home, a depressed Bishamon miraculously finds what's left of her lost battalion. They were absurdly hidden at the dark bottom of a filthy well, heavily cornered by a bizarre, drooling beast roaring at them. Completely stripped of her fancy main squad weapons and full of pent-up rage, she resorts to grabbing an old, forgotten, rusty blade that was basically just gathering dust. She pulverizes the scumbag parasite's face using nothing but the incredible force of raw, accumulated hatred. Eventually, much later in the comfortable time of the gleaming hospital, Kazuma wakes up melancholically from his physical blackout, painfully reflecting on his own unbeatable track record of terrible, costly decisions. The thoroughly depressed nerd bursts into thick tears like a baby and begs her, virtually signing his own irreversible resignation letter for having actively ruined the immortal life of his own tough, blind boss twice across different centuries. But the peaceful goddess simply ignores all the existential drama. She calmly smiles and informs him that all disgusting humans were born to be perfect machines of monstrous mistakes anyway, and will always fail shamefully. Then, in a final stroke of possessive authority right there on the bed, she verbally overrules his idiotic exile and decrees that her useless strategist will remain firmly chained to her side, being bossed around for all of long eternity, whether he wants it or not. The Wonder Trio finally returns alive from Bishamon's crazy mansion, but the rich old man Tenjin makes a point of rubbing it in Yato's face that he promised to cut ties with Hiyori to keep the girl safe. Dodging this basic responsibility like a deadbeat dad running from child support, Yato simply decides not to cut any ties at all. When Hiyori finally steps into high school wearing her new uniform, the stray god shows up, pestering the girl to start a fan club dedicated to him. Hiyori, demonstrating a shred of sanity, treats him to the absolute silence he deserves. Meanwhile, Heaven's board of directors holds a completely useless meeting to complain about the corruption and the absolute mess Bishamon made with Yato. The blonde goddess even admits she screwed up, but her ego is so massive that she refuses to bow her head and apologize to the celestial suits. Far away from this bureaucracy, the capitalist god Ebisu knocks on Yato's door with an indecent proposal and a lot of cash. He literally wants to buy Yukine, who is now worth his weight in gold on the celestial black market after evolving into a blessed vessel. Yato and the teenager himself stare at the mountain of money, drooling like two starving dogs, and Ebisu leaves an advance payment on the table before bouncing.
Surely a blessed vessel deserves better than that. Have you no shrine of your own, Yato?
But before the two idiots can blow it all, they get a call to exorcise a little monster that had been running scams on defenseless old ladies. Since normal attacks have zero effect on it, Yukine decides to solve the problem by injecting pure capitalism straight into the monster's veins. He chunks all of Ebisu's cash right into the beast's mouth, forcing the monster to swallow the dough until it inflates like a balloon, allowing Yukine to slice the giant target with ease. With the money completely pulverized and his dream of buying his own home going down the drain, Yato spirals into a deep depression in the corner of the room. Seeing the pathetic state of her favorite god, Hiyori grabs some glue and popsicle sticks to build a miniature model shrine. When Yato receives this kindergarten arts and crafts project, he breaks down in tears like a needy baby, proving he is the easiest deity to manipulate in all of history. After a lot of crying, Yato pulls off the miracle of legally registering his popsicle stick shrine at the city hall, thinking he has finally won at life and become a respected deity. But since the universe hates seeing this bum smile, his toxic ex, Nora, steps out of the shadows to ruin the vibe. At school, that kid named Manabu, who used to get beat up in the bathroom, tries to confess his feelings to Hiyori, but fails miserably. The disturbing detail is that the boy has simply deleted Yato from his own memory, which sets off a giant red flag. If all humans forget about the stray god, Yato will vanish from existence in the blink of an eye, and Hiyori feels the weight of this ticking time bomb around her neck. While Yukine uses his free time to train his invocations with the glasses-wearing nerd Kazuma to get stronger, Yato gets summoned by his crazy ex via text message. Without a single ounce of dignity, Yato goes to the meetup and is forced to revert to his goth god of calamity phase, plunging the night into a bloody murder spree under Nora's orders. He bows his head to her because he is absolutely terrified of the mysterious father pulling the strings in the shadows. But in the middle of the bloodbath, Yato goes into an absolute panic, imagining that his beloved Hiyori might forget his existence, and this needy desperation snaps him out of his murderous trance. He tries to bail, but Nora locks him in a basement of emotional sadomasochism against his will. It's at this moment that the figure of father finally shows his face, throwing the dog a bone. He tells Yato he'll only get his freedom if he descends into the depths of the underworld to rescue a phantom conjurer. The useless god has no choice but to accept the suicide mission to clear his record and try to get back home before he is forgotten forever. Yato dives straight into the sewer of death known as Yomi, with the psychopathic Nora transforming into a water blade and creating a barrier to protect this divine trash's body. Since his smell wasn't great to begin with, Nora orders Yato to scrub rotten underworld water all over his own face to mask his scent and keep the monsters from tearing his legs off. On the surface, Hiyori is dragged by her friends on a triple date to a bizarre amusement park infested with giant capybaras, but the amnesia hits hard, and Yato's name begins to fade from her brain like like smoke. Up in the heavenly gated community, the Convention of Gods comes to the conclusion that Ebisu is a criminal who plays at summoning monsters in his free time. The suits vote to execute the preppy god, completely ignoring Bishamon's protests. Underground, Yato bumps into the exact target of his suicide mission. Ebisu reveals he only went down to hell to ask the goddess of death, Izanami, for a few tips on how to control his monsters without having his own body rot in the process. They are dragged into the living room of the goddess of death, who plays a dirty trick and appears with Hiyori's face to manipulate Yato's weak mind. Izanami offers a banquet, but the two refuse because swallowing food from hell is begging to never leave. Frustrated that she couldn't shove food in their mouths, the undead goddess tries to seduce Yato, but Nora shuts that down instantly. Izanami then drops an ultimatum. She'll hand over the magic words, but one of them has to stay trapped down there forever to keep her company. Since Yato and Ebisu both refuse the offer to become eternal slaves, she throws them into an arena and warns them that the loser of their brawl will be permanently stuck in hell. At the amusement park, Hiyori tries to buy capybara keychains, but starts crying in the middle of the store when she realizes she has completely forgotten who she was buying them for. Down below, Yato and Ebisu trade blows and therapy. The stray god gives a cheap motivational speech about wanting to make others happy, and Ebisu gets so jealous that he uses the fight purely as a distraction. In a cowardly and brilliant move, Ebisu summons a bat, snatches the secret item right out of Izanami's hands, waves bye-bye to Mami, and runs for his life alongside Yato. Freaking out over being abandoned, Izanami summons her demonic hags to devour their flesh. And while Hiyori's favorite god runs for his life through the depths of hell, up on the surface, the girl gets her lips swiped and swallowed by an extra named Fujisaki right in the middle of a ridiculous mascot parade. Hiyori runs frantically, scrubbing her mouth to try and erase the unwanted kiss from that party crasher Fujisaki from her memory, like she's trying to scrub out a stubborn ketchup stain. Suddenly, she hears Yukine's voice complaining about homework and, in an explosion of relief at finally recovering her memories, grabs the boy in a tight hug. Meanwhile, at Kolfku's house, the burly Daikoku is crying buckets because his goddess of poverty has gone missing, which is bizarre considering they usually want her to bounce as fast as possible. We find out that all the gods are locked down in heaven, so Hiyori decides to go after Yato, realizing she knows absolutely nothing about the divine hobo. Speaking of the devil, Yato and Ebisu are currently running a desperate marathon through the underworld, fleeing from Izanami's monstrous hags. When they get cornered, Nora casually sacrifices two of Ebisu's regalia to clear a path, leaving Yato disgusted and Ebisu traumatized by the errand girl's coldness. Yato questions why the hell father wants to save Ebisu, and the suited god hands over his magical brush, telling Yato to run away with his only surviving weapon. Ebisu drops the big revelation that his master plan to control Ayakashi is really just an attempt at glorified pest control to save humans from chaos and pointless death. Yato is deeply moved by this suicidal dedication and decides he's going to save the suit because he wants to, not because daddy ordered him to. They get caught by Izanami again, so Yato slices one of the hags and tells Ebisu to run. Up above, Hiyori tries to find Yato's name in history books, failing miserably and suspecting he uses a fake name to run scams. Kazuma gossips with a spirit tree through Tsuyu, finding out that Yato is in the underworld with Ebisu and Nora. At the same time, Heaven's suits lock up the gods of fortune for security while punishing Ebisu for playing monster summoner, which makes the spider god snap and leads Kazuma to knock out the guards with his bare fists. Back in hell, Ebisu hits a dead end while flashing back to past traumas about how jerk Regilius used to say his life was disposable since he'd just reincarnate anyway. Hiyori and Yukine arrive at a locked entrance to the underworld with no idea what to do. When Yato is captured, Ebisu decides to stay behind, but Yato injects him with a colossal dose of the will to live. Ebisu decides he really wants to eat dinner at Olive House and escapes through a ventilation shaft, but Izanami, acting like the clingiest ex-girlfriend in history, lassos Yato's foot with her massive hair and drags the poor guy back into the darkness. Hiyori and Yukine crawl down the ventilation shaft, but the ghost of Christmas past, Kugaha, pops out of nowhere, grabs the girl and tries to slice her hand off just to swap it with his own. Yukine steps up to defend his friend, trying to bind Kugaha using his old name, which fails miserably because the guy was exiled. Kugaha laughs in the teenager's face, rubbing salt in the wound by saying Yato prefers playing with Nora's sword because she has multiple names and is way more dangerous when it's time to kill. But Hiyori steps up as the perfect cheerleader, inflating Yukine's ego by telling him he is Yato's exclusive and loyal blessed vessel. Empowered by this friendship buff, Yukine summons a magical borderline so ignorantly powerful that it sends Kugaha flying straight into the bottom of the river. Meanwhile, downstairs, Yato is dragged back by the queen of the underworld, but he smiles in relief because Ebisu survived, leaving Nora's psychopathic mind utterly confused. Ebisu has an existential flashback reading books, realizing that he himself is basically a glorified Nora with multiple names and Izanami's first rejected son. He then wakes up outside, surrounded by Bishamon and her elite troop. The suited god spends his last drop of energy begging them to save Yato before passing out. Izanami tries to pull Yato into the abyss, but only manages to rip his shoe off, leaving Yato absurdly offended. Nora plays the role of a sinister nurse, tending to his wounds in the shadows, and Yato thinks for a split second that her unflappable coldness is actually incredibly useful, before mentally cursing himself for being trash and preferring her over Yukine. On the surface, Yukine and Hiyori are about to commit tactical suicide by crawling into the vent, but Kofuku and Daikoku show up to warn them they'd turn to dust in there. Yukine begs Bishamon for help, and the goddess of war exudes supreme tsundere energy, personally descending into hell guided by Kofuku to save the guy she hunted for centuries. Izanami starts closing all the doors, but Bishamon follows the trail of demonic Pantene hair and starts beating the crap out of her. She throws it in Yato's face that she's only risking her neck because she hates owing favors and wants to pay off her debt, promising everyone will get out alive. Outside, Ebisu finally wakes up from his beauty sleep and drops the golden tip of the match, revealing that the only way to fish Yato out of there requires a spell cast by someone from the human shore. Bishamon continues her underworld bar fight against Izanami, getting captured and separated from Kazuma before her own gang of divine weapons sweats bullets to free her. On the surface, Ebisu explains the broken mechanics of the soul call, and Hiyori uses her student lungs to scream Bishamon's name, yanking the platinum goddess out of the abyss like she was pulling up a colossal carrot. But Heaven's HR department takes no prisoners, and the executioners furiously descend to cancel Ebisu's subscription to life once and for all. Bishamon tries to be diplomatic and asks Takamikazuchi to hear the guy's defense, but the god of thunder denies the request and resorts to brutal violence. Hiyori keeps screaming Yato's name like a broken record, but the spell fails miserably until her neurons connect and she realizes Yato forged his own name. The kanji on the shrine wasn't the katakana to, but rather the absurdly similar kanji boku. With this grammatical epiphany, she screams his real, embarrassing name, Yaboku. The spell works instantly, and Yato is sucked back into the world of the living at such a criminal speed that he lets go of Nora's hand, ditching the girl in the void like unwanted space junk as he crash lands into the arms of his makeshift family. The touching reunion lasts exactly 2 seconds before Takamikazuchi orders Kyun to fry everyone. Bishamon tanks the divine lightning, tells the gang to run, and mounts a giant lion to take the fight to the sky, where Kazuma uses his perfect aimbot to slice Kyun's nose with a surgical strike, while Yato, Hiyori, and company run for their lives escaping the divine police. Yukine decides this is the perfect time to give a lecture. With celestial missiles raining from the sky, the teenager scolds the god for hiding his true name and for not trusting him, reminding Yato that he swore his own name to protect him from any threat. The family drama is abruptly cut short when Heaven conjures the pacification ring, an ancient art that basically functions as a targeted airstrike designed to turn enemies of Heaven into instant barbecue. Yato draws his weapon, fixated on making sure Ebisu gets to eat at that fancy restaurant, and in a display of brute force, tears the giant ring in half before it fires. But Heaven's defense system is stubborn, and the ring of death magically materializes right under the suited god's feet. Bishamon screams for him to run, but the target is already locked in for elimination.
No! Run, Ebisu!
Our favorite stray god reaches a whole new level of criminality by escaping his hospital room, stealing Kazuma's elegant suit and stuffed wallet, and taking the newborn, child version of Ebisu on a dining date to Olive House. While Kazuma cries over his emptied bank account and Bishamon tries to make sense of the mess in the hospital room, Hiyori and Yukine put on their detective hats and start tailing the suited deadbeat. At the restaurant, the vibe is heavier than the protagonist's conscience. The mini-capitalist gobbles down his meal and adorably asks if his past incarnation was a trash person, since the gods of heaven decided he deserved the death penalty. This triggers Yato's PTSD, forcing him to relive the grotesque execution where the heavenly forces crushed the original Ebisu with a pacification ring while cheering and applauding like it was a championship final. Yato remembers the original Ebisu breaking down, crying, and admitting to himself that he didn't want to turn into fertilizer before exploding into pieces right in front of him. Back in the present, our protagonist breaks down in tears, crying in front of the confused child and apologizing like a lunatic in a family restaurant. After this unpaid therapy session, little Ebisu visits Bishamon's mansion to request political asylum for Iwami. The goddess accepts and organizes a condo meeting with Tenjin, where he discovers that Ebisu's original plan was to tame spiritual beasts for the greater good, but the blessed magic brush stolen from the depths of the underworld has simply vanished off the map. Far away, Daikoku makes himself sick worrying about Yato's diet, but Kolfuku guarantees that the trio's power of friendship will keep him alive. Yato then drags Yukine and Hiyori on a stroll, confessing his blood-stained resume as a professional killer. The parasitic girl named Nora sprouts from the shadows, acting like an offended toxic ex for being forgotten in hell, stating that she forgives his abandonment. But surprising absolutely everyone, Yato finally grows a titanium spine and revokes the girl's name, kicking the ghost out of his life once and for all while traumatic memories of their childhood flash before his eyes. Desperate for validation, Yato asks Yukine how to stop being so useless. As the two slice up corrupted monsters that spawn out of nowhere, Yukine decrees that their new company policy will focus on severing chaos and disorder instead of slicing up humans. Hiyori decides to make the career change official by clapping her hands and praying for the stray to transform into a god of fortune, making his cheeks turn as red as a tomato. However, peace is an absolute joke. The boy Fujisaki, that exact same weird nobody, is seen holding the coveted underworld brush in the shadows, revealing himself to be none other than Yato's infamous father. He watches his son from afar with the smile of a manipulative psychopath, warning the empty air that this rebellious teenage phase will never be enough for him to escape the family's clutches.
Looks like he's hit his rebellious stage. Well, isn't that just adorable?